At this point in my life, I have probably read hundreds of literary novels, and my favorite by far are books about girlhood. And not only that, I know these are the books that have made me a better writer. If you think about it, Girlhood is full of obsession, power dynamics, emotional stakes, identity shifts, transformation, memory, longing, desire, all the things a great story needs no matter what genre you're writing in. And in this video, I'm gonna break down 8 of my favorite literary novels on girlhood and tell you exactly what they can teach you about writing. These are the 4 categories I'm gonna break the video up into. So grab a coffee, a snack, a notebook, and let's chat about books. If you watch my other videos, you know that obsession comes up a lot. I love encouraging writers to mind their obsessions and write about them, but I also just love the general notion of obsession, being so gripped or fixated by something that you can't stop thinking about it. And no girlhood book would be complete without a little obsession. So the first book on our list is Eileen by Ottessa Moshfegh. And the protagonist in Eileen is a little bit older than some of the other characters we're going to be talking about in this video, but I wanted to include it because I love when a coming-of-age girlhood novel takes place beyond high school. Eileen has graduated and she's in the workforce, and I think that still counts as girlhood because it's a reminder that girlhood doesn't have to happen in the same time frame for everyone. I think that's a lot more realistic to life, and as a writer, it offers you less constraints. You don't have to have everything happen to your character in high school. Girlhood is expansive. So Eileen is definitely a weird girl. She is full of self-loathing and resentment. She works as a secretary at a boys' prison, and then she also takes care of her alcoholic father, who is very emotionally abusive and honestly completely deranged. But when she meets the beautiful and cheery Rebecca St. John, who comes to the boys' prison as the new counselor, Eileen becomes increasingly infatuated with her. It's her first friend, it's her first connection to another female, and that infatuation soon leads to a crime being committed. So this novel is a must read, and it's honestly a masterclass in creating a protagonist that is both unsettling and oftentimes repulsive, but also you feel so much sympathy for. I think that's a really hard balance, and Ottessa completely nails it. Eileen also shows us that internal obsession can be plot. And what I mean by that is so many of the plot points in this novel are driven by Eileen's desires and infatuations. And obsession might not seem like a plot point when you first think about it, but plot is cause and effect. Plot is interaction. Plot is what drives the story forward. And Eileen's obsessions are doing just that. They are causing her to do things that bring about story, and they are driving the plot forward. So as a writer, this novel taught me that plot does not always need to be brought about by big events. If executed correctly, internal chaos can drive the plot just as powerfully. Next up, we have The Girls by Emma Cline. Ugh, if I could write like anyone, I would want to write like Emma Cline. As you can see, this is a favorite. I have read this more than once. I've also read her other book, The Guest, more than once, and I probably will again now that I'm holding it in my hands. This book takes place in 1960s California and follows 14-year-old Evie, who's such an endearing character. She's very lonely and she's just longing for friends, for identity, for freedom, all of the things that make being a 14-year-old girl feel unbearable. So when she is swept up by an older girl, Suzanne, who brings her to a ranch in the hills, and she meets an infamous cult and the charismatic leader, naturally she gets swept up in this infatuation for Suzanne and the lifestyle that Suzanne brought her into. And as you can guess, things go horribly wrong. This is another brilliantly written first-person novel that goes back and forth from the past to the present, so we get adult Evie's perspective looking back on her childhood, which adds a really rich layer to an adult looking back on a teenage perspective. She's mining through her memory and trying to make sense of it all, and just adds so much depth to her character. As a writer, this is a book to study if you want to write about atmosphere and yearning. Emma is so good at getting us so close to her character, Evie. You feel absolutely immersed in these pages, and I think it's because Emma writes as if she really does know everything about her character. And not only that, she writes as if she's aware of what Evie is not saying or what she can't say, the emotions that are underlying, where those emotions and obsessions are coming from. So read this book if you want to learn how to build tension if you don't necessarily want to have a big plot. Emma's command of language and her deep understanding for her characters show you how to build tension with your language, not necessarily these big explosive plot points. We can't talk about girlhood without talking about friendships and the beauty and chaos they can bring into a girl's life. Exploring the dynamics between girls are so layered with intimacy, betrayal, power struggles, all the things you need for good fiction. So first, let's talk about Marlena by Julie Buntin. This book has left a mark on me in a way I don't think any other book has. I think this was one of my first just really immersive girlhood books, and I just have read it multiple times and will probably read it again. This one takes place in rural Michigan, where we follow another lonely 15-year-old named Kat. She just moves there with her mother and brother, and she gets immediately swept up into her neighbor Marlena's world. Marlena is beautiful and chaotic and popping pills all the time, and Kat ends up experiencing so many of her firsts with Marlena, her first drinks, her first cigarettes, her first kiss, and the two of them navigate their desolate town together. But in a year, Marlena will be dead, and Kat will be left with the memory of that friendship and how much it impacted her life. As a writer, you can learn so much from this book: how to explore grief and loss in a non-linear way, how to talk about addiction. But even further, I love how this book talks about unreliable memory. So this is another book that alternates between the past and the present. Adult Kat is looking back on her life, but she's also not 100% about the memories that she's unearthing. It adds so much tension to the novel and makes both of those timelines equally compelling. It also shows how much memory can affect us and what that means when we look into the past. As a writer building characters, you're inevitably going to have to tap into your characters' memories. But are they remembering those things correctly? And if not, how can that enrich the story? You can also learn so much about toxic intimacy in this book. Obviously, this is between two friends, but I think any relationship that you're exploring, any relationship that's on the brink, you can learn so much about how to dive deeper into that chaos and into that intimacy with this book. Next, we have The Lightness by Emily Temple. Obsessed with this cover, by the way. And honestly, this one needs to be talked about more. This came out in 2018, but I still think about it to this day. This one follows Olivia after her father leaves for a meditation retreat in the mountains and never returns. She retraces his steps to the Levitation Center. There she enrolls in a summer program, which she calls the Buddhist Boot Camp for Bad Girls. She soon becomes intertwined with a group of girls, Serena, Laurel, and Janet, who are all on the same mission to defy weightlessness of their bodies and learn how to levitate. So this is a book for you if you are writing an ensemble cast. Emily does such a great job of differentiating the voices between the four girls, which can be such a challenge. And even though this book is written in first person from one girl's perspective, the other girls still jump off the page. This book is also a great read if you're exploring girlhood in the body, the physicality of it, what it means to be in a female body, how it affects others, the rage that can live inside it. Obviously, this pushes that even further, where these girls are literally trying to achieve weightlessness in their bodies by learning how to levitate and defy gravity. But I think it's such a great book to read to remind you of the physicality of girlhood and to be able to add that in your prose. You can't talk about girlhood without talking about mothers. They play such a pivotal role in a girl's life, whether they're present or absent, and I think that their relationship is always layered and complex. I read so many different mother-daughter books when I was writing my novel, since that's such a central story in the novel. And I think that no matter if your story explores mother-daughters at all, there's still so much you can learn from unpacking the relationship. And if we're gonna talk about emotional intensity, we're gonna talk about Janet Finch's book, White Oleander. I feel like I always say that wrong, so hopefully I didn't say it wrong now. But this book is one of the most intense books I think I've ever read. And also on a line level, this is one of those books that make you think, I will never write again, because it's so good. So the plot follows 14-year-old Astrid, whose extremely narcissistic mother ends up in prison, forcing Astrid to move through a series of foster homes in Los Angeles. And with each foster home, she experiences a new relationship, a new lesson, or sometimes a new abuse, all while grappling with her feelings for her mother and if she'll ever see her again. Did I mention that this book is heartbreaking? So the author mirrors this so beautifully in her prose. So since Astrid has such a conflicted inner world, through shifting identities or trying to figure out like where her loyalties lie, all while trying to understand how she feels about her mother and if she'll ever see her again. And Janet Finch relays that so beautifully in the prose and in metaphors. She uses so much sensory detail and really has a command of language that builds this internal chaos rather than just having sort of cliche meltdowns or big explosive moments. We're feeling it all through Janet's language. This is, I think, such a wonderful lesson in restraint as a writer. Sometimes we just want to go crazy on the page and write these big explosive details, and sometimes that's fine. But Janet Finch really shows you how you can pull back and harness that restraint into really beautiful prose that still move the plot and completely immerse the reader. She does this so well with setting too. Each foster home really mirrors Astrid's emotional arc or conflict. So again, you're not just being shown what's happening, you're feeling it. So I think it begs a really interesting question for us writers. How can you use setting not just as a backdrop, but as a tool to reflect your character's growth and turmoil? Another messy mother-daughter relationship can be found in The Blurry Years by Eleanor Kreisman. This one takes place in the late 70s to early 80s in Florida as we follow Callie from age 6 to 18. She's living this scattered life with her mother, and even though this book is quite short, it's so powerful as we move through Callie's life that are sort of overshadowed by her mother's mistakes. A huge takeaway I got from this book was its use of structure. It's told in fragments, which showed me how to create a full arc just using vignettes. And this was really pivotal to me when I was writing my book, because I think we can get so caught up in the rights and wrongs of structure or its constraints. We're often so concerned with what other people have done that we forget that this is our book and there really isn't any rules. Reading The Blurry Years reminded me that I could jump around in time, I could end a scene whenever I wanted, and even how the scenes looked on the page, it's okay to have that white space, and I think that it creates a really interesting narrative that way. In this case, I think that the author really used it to show how scattered Callie's life was with her mother. So in that way, it just added so much more to the narrative. After reading this, it felt like I was given permission to have the structure influence the story, not the other way around. Coming of age is such a rich part of life for writers. No matter who your character is or what part of their life you're writing about, knowing how they came of age can really help you create a fuller, more dynamic character. It's an emotional foundation. And I think the two books that we're going to talk about next do it so well. So first we have In Zanesville by Joanne Beard. This is really a friendship book, but I wanted to include it in this part of the video because our main character is in such a beginning stage of her life. She is a late bloomer. She really doesn't think very much of herself and her life in the 1970s, and she really relies on her friend to show her who she is and where she's going. So first of all, this book is hilarious, and not in like a big slapstick kind of way, but in really small, wonderful ones. Joanne's humor really sneaks up on you and sort of challenges what you think about a very quiet suburban life. And as a writer, we can learn so much from adding humor to quiet storytelling moments and using that humor to build tension. Humor connects us and it makes us care more about the characters. And sometimes it can make your story more dynamic by coming at the reader unexpectedly and making them laugh like it did in this book for me. I think it's a vital part of a story to add richness and depth. And sometimes as writers, we need some breathing room. We're very serious, too serious sometimes. And I think we're being reminded that you can add humor, even if it's just for yourself, like even if you don't want to keep it in your prose, but it brings back that like lightness and fun to the page when sometimes we're taking ourselves or the story a little too seriously. This book also has one of my favorite opening scenes. Talk about pulling the reader in right away. It's a scene between the two friends who are, like I said, they're 14-year-old girls, and they're babysitting a bunch of kids, like 6 kids at this one house, and one of the kids starts a fire in the bathroom. And it's so funny how they take charge sort of the situation and how they're really only thinking about themselves and how the whole situation is embarrassing. And I think this opening scene can really show you how to pull your reader in with voice and tone rather than just plot. And finally, let's end on a classic, Who Will Run the Frog Hospital by Lori Moore. I think I wanted to cry after reading this book because I was so sad that it ended. Much like in Zanesville, we've got so much humor, nostalgic, and friendship happening in this little book. Barry and her friend are working at a theme park called Storyland in upstate New York, and this is another book that really challenges memory and has an adult perspective looking back on girlhood. And what we can learn from this as writers is how to capture that longing for a time when things felt sharper and more alive. We talked about this a little bit when we talked about obsession, how that can move the plot forward, but so can longing. This book isn't about what will happen next, it's what happened back then. This story is driven by emotional memory and pulling the reader along with that emotional ache. As a writer, you can ask yourself, how can I use memory as not only to deepen my character's past, but also their present? Or while you're writing flashbacks, you can layer them with that tenderness, that regret or transformation to not only enrich the scene, but to deepen that emotionality. So to wrap up, I think I keep coming back to books about girlhood because they're just so full of everything. Want, loss, change, becoming. And as a writer, what more could you ask for? It's so full of inspiration. So I hope this video gave you something to think about within your own writing. And if you liked it, I would love if you could give it a like or subscribe, or definitely let me know in the comments what are your favorite girlhood books and what you're reading right now. And if you're working on a novel yourself about girlhood or just a novel in general, I do offer one-on-one coaching, whether you're just have a spark of an idea or you're deep in revisions, or maybe you're ready to query. My coaching packages offer immersive and supportive guidance for any stage of your writing journey. You can find all the information for that in the link below. So I'll see you in one of my other videos or next time. Bye.